I'm terrified. I'm truly terrified. The entire industry, the car market as a whole, is going to change forever. We're starting to see some significant changes in panic, and anxiety is what I'm starting to feel with these tariffs that are being imposed. Now we know a lot of it's for the good, and ultimately what Trump is doing is trying to straighten out business and bring employment back home, raise funds, so hopefully reducing taxes is the end game. More employment, lower taxes, that's the win. But in getting there, often there's going to be some collateral damage, and a lot of other countries and certainly a lot of other markets are going to feel the burn. And so from a car buyer's perspective, this is where I get a little bit nervous. And a lot of this is coming on the heels of supply and demand. We know what that's all about. And the car market, whether these tariffs last for a week, a day, 6 months, a year, or beyond, we've already heard come February 1st, there's going to be some drastic changes. Yes, we're going to see a 25% tariff applied to both Canada, Mexico. Europe's going to feel some burn too. And there's threats of all kinds of different varying degrees of tariffs applied to a lot of European countries and businesses. A lot of the car industries that we enjoy today. If you like a BMW, maybe like a Benz or an Audi, those vehicles will all start to feel the burn because a lot of those vehicles are still manufactured in Europe. And while a lot of them are now moving, headquarters, of course, still are in Europe, a lot of these car manufacturers are starting to set up, satellite businesses. Some of them are actually built in Mexico, Canada, US, and across the globe. This is happening all over. But what's starting to happen now is you think about companies like Honda, Toyota, Stellantis, even small amounts of GM and Ford products are built in Canada. Well, this Saturday, we're about to see a 25% tariff applied to these vehicles. Now, what does this mean for the market coming up? Again, depending on how long we hang in there, depending how long these tariffs are sitting around for, this may have a minimal, zero impact, or could be absolutely catastrophic. Let's go to the worst case scenario because we don't know yet what this market actually looks like. We know Toyotas and Hondas, again, built in Canada. If there's a Honda, maybe there's a Toyota you've been thinking about buying here coming up this year. Maybe you're saving your pennies, maybe you're looking for the right deal and possibly just shopping around. This Saturday, depending on how this is all implemented, we could start seeing aggressive price increases across the board. I mean, we saw in Canada already this week, Tesla jumped ahead of the game and started upping their prices on the 3 and the Y of the Teslas. Are seeing a $9,000 increase in their base price and a $4,000 increase in the price in the price adjustments to their S's and their X's. They're already getting ahead of the tariff, 25%. So maybe you're thinking, you want to buy that BMW. Well, if we're talking 25% increase and maybe it's a car that's built in Europe, there's still a strong possibility that the tariffs may be applied to a lot of these European countries. And what all that's going to do is increase the price. So maybe it's a $100,000 BMW today. We haven't necessarily heard what the target landing point is for a lot of those vehicles in Europe are going to be. There's conversation. It could be 25%, 50%, 100%. Could be a lot of different things. Even if it's 50%, that BMW you're hoping to buy today for $100,000, in a month from now, that might cost you $150,000. See, now all of a sudden the affordability goes away because a lot of people buy within close to their means. They look at their budget. They say, I can fit, $1,000 a month, $500 a month into my monthly car payments. And then they start to stretch and they pull and see how much that they can get. Maybe a 6 or 7 year car loan, which is bad behavior, by the way. I mean, ultimately you should try to keep it to 3-4 years ultimately. But a lot of people go for that 5 years and beyond. And if that's the case, a lot of people stretch and say, look, I can afford $800 a month over 6 years. That's going to take me to X. And this is what I can afford. Maybe it's a $60,000 car. And this is just where life lands. But that $60,000 car now all of a sudden becomes a $90,000 car. Now, bye-bye to the budget. Where maybe you were looking at a Toyota Highlander. Maybe the only thing you'll be able to afford shortly is a Toyota Corolla. See, these are the way the market is shifting right now. Now, we're also hearing things about a lot of these European car manufacturers contemplating moving some of their facilities to North American soil, just trying to avoid the tariffs. We've heard Porsche possibly starting to suggest that they may build the 911 here in North American soil, repurpose some of the Volkswagen facilities. That might be an option. So you may be able to get your Porsche 911, but it's still likely going to be some sort of an incremental cost increase. Even just to move and retool and set everything up, you're likely going to feel it somewhere along the way. That comes at a cost. A lot of the Volkswagen products built in, not a big shocker, a lot of them are built in Mexico. A lot of GM products are built in Mexico. Stellantis products built in Mexico. You could list off almost every manufacturer in whether it's Europe or wherever it is, even the North American market and products. Many of them are built in Mexico. Why? Well, because a lot of the plants and the facilities were cheaper to build and maintain. The workers were lower wages. And so to get that same manufacturing ability, you were able to save some money at the corporate level. So that's why they outsourced and repurposed some of their products to be built in places like Canada with a poor exchange rate. When you talk the US versus the Canadian exchange being somewhere around that 70 cents, 68 cents to American dollar, means that you can get almost 1.5 times more productivity from that US vehicle that's built in Canada but moved over to the US. Same thing goes with Mexico. The peso, although things have changed there, it's still a cheaper way of conducting business in both Mexico and Canada. European car manufacturers, they're going to charge what they're going to charge. But I also heard in the inauguration the conversation about how the representation of US vehicles in Europe is very minimal. So there's this idea of, well, they're not buying our products, so we're going to make them pay if they want to sell our products on our soil. So whether that's good or not so good, that's a decision we all have to make. Now, what we're likely going to see here coming up in this year is a shift. And again, depending on how long, we're only going to the worst case scenario, depending on how long this goes on, we might find ourselves shopping more and more for domestic products. A lot of these European car makers are going to move their manufacturing facilities to North American soil, which is ultimately what the current administration is looking for, is just relocating, because a lot of those cars, if they're built here on US soil, that's a win for Americans. That's a win in so many ways. You're able to get your vehicle that you always wanted. There's a chance you might get it for cheaper eventually. And a great win as well is employment. Employment rates could improve. You could get more of these jobs built by US workers. So you get, hypothetically, let's just say, for giggles, BMW says, look, we can't afford to do business like this. We're going to move a facility, say, to Tennessee. So they move a facility down there. They employ 4,000 workers. Well, that's 4,000 new jobs in some little town somewhere in the middle of nowhere. And that's a win for American employment. Obviously, that's going to help locals with jobs. It's going to help the jobless rate. It's certainly going to help the economy. And it's a win for everybody. Ultimately, what we are going to see, though, in some of this transition, we're going to see some short-term transitionary pains. Now, these tariffs apply to Canadian products, Mexican products, even if they're US products, they're being manufactured in these other countries. That's going to cost money to get them back onto US soil. So that might be manufactured, a Stellantis product or a Toyota might be built in Ontario, but to get it across the border, it's going to be charged. Ultimately, this unfortunate part there is it's probably going to be costing US buyers a little bit more money as well to buy those products. It's going to ultimately hurt the buyers, and it's ultimately going to hurt the manufacturers if all of a sudden the products cost 25, 30, 40% more. Other buyers are going to say, I don't need that BMW. Instead of $150,000, why don't I buy something else? Maybe buy a Chevy product, maybe a Ford that's built in US soil. And so that's going to change this entire market. And depending on what side you like to sit on, and it's certainly good for the American buyers. This is always going to be a win for domestic products. And ultimately, with reducing the jobless rates, increase the quality jobs that are hitting the US and the Americans. And ultimately, it's going to push a lot of these manufacturers into more competitive nature. The idea of competition is going to be strong and very willful. So what you will find is short term, prices are going to skyrocket. There's no doubt about it. Prices on everything, domestic products that are built and outsourced, European products that are outsourced, even a lot of the Japanese products, again, I already mentioned some of the Toyotas and Hondas that are built in Canada or Mexico are also outsourced. They're going to cost more money for the consumer. Whether you're buying it in Canada, buying it in the US, it's going to cost you more money. The end game is more revenue generated for the US is going to be a win, certainly for deficits, and it's going to be a huge win ultimately for the jobless rate. So there's a lot of wins in this. The consumer is going to feel the burn though. And so what I do see, what you are likely going to see is a reduction in the number of new vehicle sales. And there's already been a lot of people chatting about this. What does it ultimately mean for new vehicle sales? New vehicle sales are likely going to do a nosedive here coming up very shortly. And it almost doesn't matter what type of products, because we know Stellantis, I've already said this, GM, Ford, a lot of them outsource and build in these other countries that are currently going to be under a tariff. So all those products are going to go up in price. European cars are going to go up in price. Japanese up in price. All these vehicles are going to go up in price brand new. So that's going to now push a lot of people out of the new car markets and into the used car markets. So what's that going to do for used cars? Well, the used car market is going to experience what we saw back in 2020. Do you remember back a few short years ago, back in 2020, with all those chip shortages and that nonsense that was going on around that time? Yeah, we're going to see something similar to that, because instead of now being a chip shortage, it's going to it's going to see very much the equivalent situation where the vehicles are going to be up in price. Obviously, the new car, truck, SUV prices are going to be higher. And where it was before due to chips, now it's going to be because there's going to be less vehicles manufactured because of a lower demand. Supply will not be overgrowing. If anything, you're going to have a lower supply, lower demand, and ultimately prices up. You're going to see more of these games likely to buy these manufacturers. We saw Stellantis taking full well advantage of the consumer with jacking up prices and certainly selling only their premium trim levels. And with the premium trim levels means their profit margins go up. So we already know that game's a big game that a lot of the domestic products particularly were playing, and a lot of the truck manufacturers were playing. And honestly, across the globe, a lot of the manufacturers were doing this, trying to sell more of the high trim level vehicles with bigger profit margins. And that's likely what we're going to see more again. We're likely going to see probably a reduction in the number of vehicles that are sitting on the car lots to pick from. And you're going to see more of the premium trim levels. You might see a reduction in the affordable types of vehicles. The price point $18,000 cars are likely going to go away again. Or it's going to be much harder to get a hold of. And you're going to see much more of those high price point trim vehicles. And likely you're going to have a lot of people struggling to not only make ends meet with the cost of living crisis, because that's ongoing and that doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon, but the price of vehicles are going to go up, pushing even more people out of the new car market. Ultimately, used cars, while there is an overabundance, not an overabundance, there's an abundance of used vehicles currently right now, as there was a bit of a catch-up game over the last couple of years, and certainly with a lot of these big incentives over the last half year of 2024, people were buying more new. And so what that did was orphaned a lot of used vehicles, and a lot of used vehicles start to fill the lot. Slowly we start to see used inventory. You're seeing the auction houses starting to fill up, and there's more used products out there. There's more used cars, SUVs, trucks, some quality, some not. Unfortunately, some of those used products were eliminated with some of these fires in California and some of the floods and the hurricanes in Florida and Texas. But the balancing act is a constant ebb and flow. Overall, though, the used car inventory is sufficient. It's somewhat stagnant, but it's there. What we will likely see, and depending on how long these tariffs go on for, a longer duration of tariffs could mean a dwindling of used supply. So initially, we're going to find used car supplies and price is going to be where they're at today, which is going to be slightly escalated, but what most people consider somewhat fair, albeit slightly high in prices compared to what they saw 5 years ago. Ultimately, if these tariffs go on long enough and the shortages continue going on long enough, realistically, we're probably about to embark on a shortage in the used car sector again. You know, the lag effect. So currently we have the inventory, but if this goes on for 3 months, 6 months, maybe a year or beyond, you're likely going to have to start to see customers veering away from new products, getting into the used cars and trucks and SUVs, and that of course creates shortages and prices go up. This is inevitably where we're going to go. So here we talk again about shortages and the inventories and the high prices, and interest rates likely will be up and down, and we've already heard some of these tariffs could drive and could actually trigger some major interest rate changes. In Canada, we could see some major, not just a couple of basis points, significant spikes in the interest rates. Well, if we see an increase in interest rates, both US and Canadian markets again, and certainly in the European market, which likely could be triggered because of some of these changes, well, that's further going to push people out of the market, because people that were maybe on the cusp of buying, maybe at a 7% interest rate, you might in fact find a 12, 14% interest rate coming up. So with changes like that, you're going to find shortages in the used car sector, increased prices on new. We're likely, very likely about to see, and depending again how long this goes on for, likely to see increased interest rates, which again just slows down the overall buying of, the buying frenzy typically will start to wean, and naturally we'll see less and less people buying vehicles. And when you talk about stimulus for the economy, I know certainly in Canada, times are tough with the over high levels of taxation, and people are taxed to death in Canada right now. In US, taxes are high, certainly interest rates are high. The benefit for the American buyers and Americans in general is there's a lot of politics, and certainly there's a lot of economics behind the scenes. Ultimately, there's lots of conversation I've heard where Trump is already talking about eliminating portions of income tax, eliminating taxation on overtime. So there's huge wins for the American consumer here, long term or midterm. Short term, the increased prices are going to impact everybody. Canadian buyers likely will be pretty much shopped out or pushed out of the market. It's going to be a tougher game. The European markets, those brands, we've seen Volkswagen struggling. Nobody wants to buy the ID4s or the ID Buzz. Very few people are buying them, and they're heavily incentivized. But what's likely going to happen over there is even less, because now with the removal of the mandate in the US means there's less people motivated to buy those electric vehicles. So you're going to find Volkswagen continuing to spiral downward. And even though they're looking at some other business options, Volkswagen is struggling. The VAG, Audi's not selling their e-trons, not well. They're not doing well at all. Porsche, well, they're going to try to salvage this and move some of their manufacturing to US soil. So that's about the only way they're going to be able to compete. We look at Mercedes. They've been struggling as well. Market share is dwindling. They're certainly losing a lot of their sales. And not only that, a lot of the diehard loyalists just aren't interested in Mercedes anymore, where they used to have V8s and now 4 cylinders are replacing that. It just doesn't seem to attract the same buyer. Their lease buybacks, their lease rates aren't as aggressive with Mercedes either. And Mercedes stock prices have been nosediving. Now BMW, they've been holding their own as well. However, their electric vehicles aren't doing particularly well. And honestly, if we look at the entire European market, even in the Italian market, Maserati, Alfa Romeo, they're all Stellantis products, have been in the literal toilet. They're not doing particularly well. I hate to even say it. Some of the premier brands, even Ferrari is struggling these days with selling some of their top level vehicles. Ferrari, they're not selling, the 296 SF90s are struggling. There's more inventory laying around on lots that just aren't selling. And a lot of it's because of the hybrid, a lot of it's the V6, a lot of things, a lot of it is actually economics, if we're being honest. And even the Cylindri, their new V12's not selling like it once, like you would have anticipated with some of their V12 cars. Lamborghini, also not particularly well. A lot of these car brands now, even the premium brands, are starting to show that when you start to see people, second guess their purchasing of some of those vehicles, then that's a sign of sure things to come. It doesn't help either in places like Canada, where all of a sudden this government, the current generation, or the current government, has decided to apply this luxury tax. So that's further crushing people that would normally be in that market. It's pushing them out of the market. Why would you want to pay another 10, 15, 20% on the price of a $500,000 car? And a lot of people say boo-hoo, but realistically, every sector of the car market, from the exotic cars to luxury to electric to smaller ICEs, every car sector is going to be impacted. Even the used car market, given long enough. Now, if this only goes on for a month, it'll be a blip in the radar, and likely we won't even think twice and it'll be history. But again, thinking long-term strategies here, how do you get around this? How do you navigate this market? Well, the big way is obviously always shopping for prices. And realistically, this market is changing so quickly, so aggressively, you've really got to focus on those manufacturers that are being competitive, not just in their products, not just in their manufacturing and their quality, but all those that are able to navigate these ever-changing economics. We look at manufacturers already. Toyota and Honda, are they going to move to US soil? Volkswagen, are they moving over? Porsche, are they moving over? These companies that are navigating and already trying to think ahead to try to remain successful, those are the manufacturers you want to pay attention to. The ones that aren't competitive, the ones that do want to live like it's 1958, are likely the ones that won't be around in 2 or 3 years from now. With these big changes in the environment and the economy, it's a very interesting time. And I'm not going to fib. This is not about a sales pitch. This is literally me just ranting. It's a Friday and I want to talk about this because I truly believe this is a worrying time. It's troubling. It's an anxious time. And every car brand, what you knew about yesterday is going to be totally different tomorrow. The rules have changed. It's all different. Hats are off. Bets are off. And it's an interesting time, again, depending on how long these tariffs hang around. I do, in fact, would encourage each and every one of you to please drop a line and tell me what you believe a year from now actually looks like. What is a year? Fast forward 1 year today. What does the car market look like to you? I really would like to hear your thoughts. I really would. Because we're all navigating this market together, and it is a very insecure one at that. Anyway, with all of that said, I hope you're all going to have yourself a wonderful weekend. Stay warm. Well, hope to see each and every one in the next one. See you real soon. Bye-bye.